This podcast is sponsored by Consumers Energy and the Power My Drive program. Start your EV journey at consumersenergy.com/EV. Learn EV basics like charging and cost savings. Then find your perfect EV. Partner with us for home charging installation. Get a $500 rebate on a home EV charger, or get $10 a month simply for charging off-peak. Need more guidance? Talk to an EV specialist to help you through the process. Get started at consumersenergy.com/EV. Welcome back. I'm Karl Bloss. As our guest today, we have Kraig Schultz. Now, I know Kraig through the West Michigan EV community, the West Michigan EV motorcycle community. He's an engineer that develops EV drivetrains, has an interest in EV efficiency. So without further ado, Kraig, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Karl and Larry, for having me on the podcast. My name's Kraig Schultz. I've lived in West Michigan all my life. I was born in 1966. I've worked the last 30 years in manufacturing and new product development as a manufacturing engineer, mostly in the automotive industry. I've been working on cars since I was 8 years old. My dad owned a auto repair shop at home, and I love cars. But I've always kind of hated how complex and costly and hard to repair they are. And so I also been a bicyclist all my life, and I love bicycles because in so many ways they're superior to a car, but for many use cases, they're not as convenient as a car. I remember when I was a teenager, I saw a magazine article with a human-powered vehicle that would it was going 55 miles an hour. That was the world record at that time. And so I've always had this dream of making a practical version of that vehicle. I was a member of the International Human Powered Vehicle Association for a couple of decades. And I was studying the aerodynamics that would allow us to have these hyper-efficient vehicles. By the way, the current record for a human-powered vehicle is 89 miles per hour. And
wow,
a human athlete, a human athlete can put out a little over 1 horsepower for a few seconds, or but prolonged duration for a human who we can't put out, a little less than a half horsepower. But anyway, the idea is that with certainly less than 2 horsepower, we can get a vehicle to go with us in it to go 89 miles an hour, which is just amazing to me. So beginning around 2007, I started converting and building electric vehicles. My first conversion was a little Honda 125 I got from the junkyard, and I converted that to electric. And from 2011 to 2019, I helped coordinate fuel economy competitions in Michigan and Ohio for motorcycles, both gasoline, diesel, and electric. So I collected a lot of data on that. And then in 2014, I started doing experiments with solar power. I installed those several places, including my house, and was looking at how much energy it took to charge some of these electric vehicles that I was building, and to kind of understand, well, can we, for instance, power all of our electric vehicles with solar panels? Would that work? How many solar panels do you need on your house to power your car or your city? So anyway, my focus for my life, especially as I've gotten older, is on how to make transportation less expensive in time, money, and energy. And over the last decade, I've begun to learn, I got into this because I was really disappointed or disillusioned with how, our cars, they wear out, they rust out, or they wear out, or they're hard to work on. But anyway, they're wearing out before we even get them paid for. It just drives me nuts because I worked in the auto industry, and I know that we can build cars that last 1 million miles, but that's not what we're buying, and that's not what we're selling. And so anyway, so I know that we can build better vehicles. I know that we can build vehicles that are a lot more efficient. But as I was doing this research, I've begun to learn that we've got quite a pickle related to our population overshoot on the planet. And basically, we're creating more pollution on the planet than our planet can handle with our current lifestyle and the way that we produce things and the way that we dispose of things. And unless we radically change our consumption habits, the earth will die. And the amount of correction that we need to make in our lifestyle or the way we make and dispose of things is we need to be about 10, somewhere between 10 to 100 times better at how we're doing this. And the damage we've already done needs to be corrected, in addition to finding a balance point where we can keep living a lifestyle that we find pleasurable, but that the planet can keep up with our ecological footprint. And anyway, so for this reason, my life goal is to study and share ways to make my own lifestyle what I call net positive. Net positive means that I don't just live in balance with nature, but that my presence on this planet actually makes the planet better, or that it helps it heal. And so I'm sharing my experiments and data on my website, which is schultzengineering.us. And I focus on gathering real world data and finding solutions that are affordable and long lasting. And it's theoretically possible to have personal commuter vehicles that get over 1,000 miles per gallon equivalent. And the best that I've been doing and able to do with my limited budget is to build a semi-streamlined electric motorcycle that has averaged a little over 300 miles per gallon equivalent over the 20 some thousand miles that I've ridden it. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay, great. Thank you. And what precipitated this conversation for me was that recently the GM Hummer EV has come out in sufficient quantities that it's gotten into the hands of some reviewers. So there are a couple that we're probably familiar with if you're in the EV space, like Fully Charged out of the UK and Transport Evolved. And I saw the Transport Evolved review, and they kind of took it a little bit jokingly, like, this thing is a behemoth. It is abysmal. There's some negatives because it's so inefficient. Now, is it a halo vehicle in terms of what it can do? Absolutely. And it's always good when that kind of technology moves on to the next phase, which, Larry's a truck driver, so I know he's interested in technology. But for me personally, I saw that this thing has a 212 kilowatt hour battery. That's like 3 times what a Tesla Model 3 has. And I'm just thinking it takes long enough to charge vehicles like that. So if I have to charge a 212 kilowatt hour battery on a road trip, I mean, I don't even know how that works, time wise. So it just made me think, like, I feel like we're going in the wrong direction. Is it good for somebody who's driving a gas or a diesel vehicle equivalent and wants to upgrade to the EV like that? Yes, that's beneficial. But I think we can do so much more. And that's kind of what precipitated this conversation.
Sure.
So you've already mentioned some numbers, MPGe equivalent. In the EV space, we talk about miles per kilowatt hour. We'll stick with the MPGe to keep it to a level that others that don't speak EV can understand. The question is, you've already mentioned a little bit of this. The question is, why do we care, right? And I think part of that is we are living in this era of really cheap energy. And sure, when gas starts to go to $4 or $5 a gallon, people start screaming. But I'll tell you, that's still relatively cheap. When I lived in Germany in 2011 to 13, even back then, gas and diesel was the equivalent of $7 to $8 a gallon. And so when I came back, I thought, well, there's got to be a better way. So I got a Nissan LEAF, and Kraig has a Nissan LEAF, and we've even done some little side-by-side road tests. You remember we did that a while back, like which one's getting better efficiency and all this sort of thing.
I remember Karl edged me out. I thought I was a pretty good driver, but Karl, he beat me out.
Well, I mean, who knows what the difference was, right? It could have been the tires. It could have been anything at all. And the one thing I remember about the Nissan LEAF is my first EV was a 2012 LEAF, and the SL trim had a little tiny solar panel in it. And I was like, how can that little solar panel actually do any good? It couldn't have been bigger than maybe, let's say, 2 by 12 or something like that. It was on the rear hatch, and it turns out it was really only for trickle charging the 12-volt battery which EVs still have, to run the electronics and that sort of thing. But it does make you think, like, how much energy can solar panels provide, and is it enough? And it's one of those questions in the EV education space that I get a lot, is how come we don't just put solar panels on EVs and then they could essentially run forever? And for those watching this rather than listening to this, behind me is a picture of an Aptera, which they do have solar panels on that vehicles. So Kraig, with the idea of efficiency, like, why don't we see Tesla Model 3s with solar panels on them? Why doesn't that work and we can just run perpetually?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that. I'm going to try and share my screen for the YouTube viewers here. I got a picture up here. We'll see if we can do that.
And for those listening, we're going to put those into the show notes. Anything that Kraig or anybody shares, we'll put those in the show notes for people to pull up later.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah, yep. I see your solar array and your some of your vehicles.
Zoom that in a little bit. See if I can make that bigger, just a hair. There, probably see it a little better.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so the question is, first of all, well, if you want to power your car with solar panels, why don't you just put solar panels on the roof? And you could.
Exactly.
But they might, if they aren't attached to the surface, aerodynamically they can be an issue. But we can do that now. We have flexible solar panels that are pretty efficient. Traditionally, these types of panels, are ground mounted or mounted on your roof. What this picture shows, these are actually my solar panels, one of my electric cars and one of my electric motorcycles, and it shows 12 panels there. Yeah, I count right. There's each one of those makes in Michigan, they make around 1 kilowatt hour a day in the middle of the summer. So that would be the equivalent of 12 kilowatt hours of production per summer day. And I also have data for the whole entire year. And for this little white car, it's an electric or a gas car that was converted to electric way back in 1990 that I still drive, by the way. This car can go, the amount of these solar panels that are pictured, 12 of these solar panels, there happen to be, for people who are listening, they're 250 watt solar panels. They produce 2,500 kilowatt hours per year at my house in Michigan. 12 solar panels, and they would allow this little Festiva size car, which is maybe a Ford Escort size car, what would be a modern equivalent. It's the size of a Yugo. It's a small car, but it would make that car. It happens to have the same efficiency as the new Model 3 cars, which are the Tesla Model 3 is a very efficient. In fact, in my benchmarking, it seems to be still the most efficient sedan you can buy. It's getting like 141 miles per gallon equivalent.
Wow.
MPGe that's what the it's a standard range. It's a small battery in the Model 3 car. Gets 141 miles per gallon equivalent. That's similar to what this little white car gets. This little car with 12 solar panels on my house can go 8,500 miles per year. So these panels would fit very easily on my roof. But pictured right next to these solar panels is a streamlined electric motorcycle that I built. So the car could go almost 9,000 miles a year. The motorcycle could go, with the same electricity, 30,000 miles. So,
wow.
So, when you're talking about, I don't drive 30,000 miles a year, but I'll drive 20,000 miles a year. And so, just 12, if I had a very efficient, streamlined motorcycle, I could go lots of miles. So the question is, why? Back to your question, Karl. Why don't we put solar panels on the roof of the car? Because it takes 12 solar panels to make a Tesla, go the number of miles that we would need to go in a year, and they don't all fit on the roof of the car. Because even though the Tesla Model 3 is getting 141 miles per gallon equivalent, which is the best that you can buy an electric car right now. You put in the solar panel, there's not enough room on the roof of the car to do that. So, and it's not necessary, because any place I drive my electric cars, when I plug in my car, it's actually connected to my solar panels at home. My solar panels are net metering, and that means that when they overproduce, like they do in the middle of the day, they're making more electricity than my house needs. And so the power goes into the power lines, And if I'm plugged in even, 50 miles away, I'm connected to the same wires that are connected to the panels on my house. So there's no reason for me to drive around with the panels on the roof of my car. They're actually physically connected with wires to my panels at my house. So it's all part of the same grid, the same interconnection. So it doesn't make sense in one scenario, when you think about it, it doesn't make sense to carry around the extra weight of the solar panels on your car when, it's all going to the same place when you're charging.
Right. So the bottom line is the efficiency of the panels. And I think these are physical limitations. They're actually like physics behind this. I think today's panels are what, 20% efficient in converting the sunlight into energy. And I know there's some tweaks that are being done with different wavelengths and multi-level panels, but you're never going to get to 100%, right? Just from an engineering standpoint. So the amount of space that it would take is way more than what is on a typical vehicle like a Tesla Model S. Now, the one thing to consider is the Aptera that I have in the picture behind me. So those that don't know it, it's an electric three-wheeler, which the company claims is going to get something like 10 miles per kilowatt hour, which I think the Tesla Model 3 is like 4, right? So it's a factor of 2.5, and I don't know what the MPGe is. I think I calculated over 300 at one point. So with that, they're claiming that you can get something like 30-40 miles of electric range just by having the panels on the vehicle itself. So at that point, it actually makes sense, but anything below that, it really doesn't. And that's kind of my takeaway. You were putting up another chart there, Kraig. I'm sorry if I cut you off. Did you have another point that you want to make along those lines?
Yeah, it would have been optimal to. I'll share that again. It's the chart that shows the 2019-2020 electric vehicle, both the range and the miles per gallon equivalent for, man, that's a whole host of cars. And we this year we got even more to add to the list. But the point of this chart is the very worst electric vehicle that you could purchase would for fuel economy was the Porsche Taycan Turbo in 2020. But the Hummer, back to the Hummer, the new Hummer gets around 50 miles per gallon equivalent. So that's still about 5 times better than its gasoline predecessor.
Mm-hmm.
So even the worst, so the Porsche Taycan is now not the worst, it's the Hummer. So it really is a halo vehicle, and the prestige that you can, you've got the number one worst fuel economy vehicle that you can buy. So it is a really amazing vehicle in its capabilities, the size of its battery, its acceleration, its power, its towing capacity, its luxury, and conspicuous consumption has always been part of something that we associate with affluence and prestige. So it does do that as far as the fuel economy, but it's still, if the traditional gasoline powered Hummer was around 10 miles per gallon and the e-Hummer is around 50 miles per gallon equivalent, it's still better. We're making progress. The best car was the Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus. All of the Teslas are very slippery. They have really good aerodynamics. They've done really good job with their electronics and their efficiency. The Hyundais also, the Kona and things like that, are extremely good. But there's quite a lot of range here. You've got some cars in the 70s. But on average, or the median, I should say, is around 105 miles per gallon equivalent. And I'm happy that my car, my 2015 Nissan LEAF, is 114 miles per gallon equivalent. So it's pretty good for being actually really good for one of the first electric cars that you could buy. Now, and you can buy it used now pretty inexpensively. So that's a good deal too.
So we keep talking about cars, and I think, Kraig, privately, I think you sent me a message one time that the car itself is one of the worst things that's ever happened to humanity, essentially, because we're designing our cities around it, and we could do so much better. So, and you mentioned earlier that we really need to start looking at reducing our energy use on by an order of magnitude. So 10 to 1. So,
Right.
let's talk about other vehicles. Let's talk about e-bikes, the Aptera. There's another one called Arcimoto. They're 3-wheelers, electric motorcycles. I know there's going to be people saying, well, you know what? I still need my car, and this is Michigan, and I'm not going to get on my e-bike when it's cold and there's snow on the ground. And obviously there's validity to that. I struggle with that myself. I have 3 miles to get to the closest grocery store, but I'll tell you, I'm still going to hop in the car and go get a gallon of milk. Now, if I had the Hummer EV and I have my Kia Niro, I'm going to take the Kia Niro because it's way more efficient. But I know there are people like on Electrek. You have Micah Toll, who put on an article recently, says people don't need SUVs. You can just take bikes. And then there was a huge backlash on that, saying, don't tell me what to do. I still need to tow my boat. I have all these things that I need to do. And obviously those concerns are valid. If you only have one vehicle, you're going to pick the vehicle that does it all for you. But where do other smaller vehicles fit into this paradigm? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, when you take an example, I mean, there's a range, right? So you're going to choose if energy were expensive, and it probably will get more expensive as, if we're at peak oil, as it becomes harder and harder to get, we do things like go 50 miles out in the Gulf of Mexico and go 5 miles down and 5 miles sideways. And then, that's just a testament to how much harder it is to get oil than it used to be. It used to be Jed Clampett would shoot his musket and come bubbling up out of the ground, literally, they really, Spindledome in Texas, or Spindletop, what was it called? I mean, the gushers, the oil wanted to get out of the ground. And now we have to go to the Arctic and go dig sideways
and do fracking just to break the rocks apart.
The United States used to produce was a major, or actually produced the most oil for a lot of years, and then it was in decline. But with the introduction of fracking, we were able to get a lot of natural gas and a lot of more oil out of the ground. But that is just kind of, we're sucking on the straw, the last oil that's there, the last natural.
And we're kind of hearing the slurping sound, is what Nate Hagens from The Great Simplification says, right? We're getting really good at getting this stuff out, but we're hearing the slurping, and we're starting to get the froth.
Yeah. So as even in Saudi Arabia, they're moving into a lot of different business ventures right now, and renewable energy being one of them. But they're diversifying a lot because they know that the end of oil is coming. So as the price goes up, we will choose less expensive ways to get around. So if we compare, for instance, an electric bicycle, you're only using, and I'm not going to the miles per gallon here like we said we would, but watt hours per mile is 10 to 20 watt hours per mile for an electric bicycle. So with 1 kilowatt of energy, remember my one solar panel on my house, one can make 1 kilowatt hour a day in the summertime. So if I have a bicycle that's taking 20 watt hours per mile, what is that, 50 miles?
Yeah.
So,
and that's kind of what we're seeing. We're seeing these e-bikes with a battery that's maybe the size of a loaf of bread, and you're going to get 40 miles out of that. Go ahead, Larry.
I wanted to stop while we were on the gas. So you guys both feel that finding oil is going to get harder before we replace it with like battery electric. You think that? I feel like the technology is going to grow faster, and the reason we're not going to use, because didn't we already the demand for oil was down over the summer? Now we don't know if that was COVID or what, but it could be electric vehicles too, right? That is slowing the demand. There's enough people, enough electric cars.
As we have more electric vehicles, it relaxes demand for oil, and the price of oil is very elastic. Just a tiny if there's a shortage caused by just about anything, a refinery fire, a war in Ukraine. War in Ukraine is a huge disruption, but even minor little things disrupt the supply of oil, and we see the impact in the price of gasoline. As we have more and more electric cars, we're actually helping lower the price of gasoline. So that'll extend the consumption of gasoline for a longer period, because people are like, well, it's not very expensive, so I'm just going to use it.
There's a whole other discussion there. We'll come back to that. But a barrel of oil is not just turned into gasoline, right? So maybe we need to open that can of worms briefly.
Yeah, there's
competition.
Go ahead. There's competition in that for that oil. So if you could use that oil for producing products, plastic products, pharmaceuticals, well, everything. I mean, you just look around.
Everything carbon based. So yeah, I'm a chemical engineer, and we turned our feedstocks were always, the petrochemicals. So, the petrochemical industry is now pretty much based on the Gulf Coast because of the easy access to oil and gas, right? Whether you're making fertilizer, pesticides, plastics, any of these kind of things, the fuels, that there's so much that comes from oil. But I think if we say, well, we're just going to cut back on gasoline, or we're just going to cut back on diesel, well, there's so much more that comes out of a barrel of oil, right? You got the really heavy, sludgy stuff that's at the bottom that gets turned into asphalt. And then you have the really, really light stuff at the top. That's natural gas that gets turned into fuel or ethylene, and then made into polyethylene and all these sort of things. So just because we stop using fuels like gasoline and diesel to burn them doesn't mean that we're going to stop using oil. So in my opinion, we need to be using those feedstocks, because it's a one-time carbon pulse. It's going to come to an end. The cheap stuff, there'll always be some there, but we're using it so much faster than it was created that we needed to do the right things with it. And burning it, in my opinion, is the wrong thing to do. We need to fuel the transition to a better way. So anyway, with that interlude, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would guess that the reason we stop using burning oil for transportation is not primarily in the end driven by economics. At some point, it'll become illegal. And that's just because of our human population being so large and our ecological footprint so great. Now, there's only so much we can do with the efficiency of the vehicles. The Aptera is an extremely wonderful design because it has a 0.1 CD coefficient of drag. And so it can get through the air without using that much energy. So that Aptera, they're claiming a fuel economy or fuel efficiency that's the same as my streamlined electric motorcycle, which is a lot smaller vehicle. Physically, the frontal area of it is certainly less than half, and probably a third of the frontal area of the Aptera. But because the Aptera is completely enclosed, and they've done a good job of both at the front and the back of it closing it up, it's a nice shape. It's very streamlined. It's like a bird or a seal or a fish. And so it can get through the air without the number one consumption of energy for going down the road is aerodynamic drag. The other thing that we waste horrendous amounts of energy is in braking. So if every time we come to a stop, think about braking on a car. We use friction to stop the car. But if you ran into a brick wall or you ran into another car, you know what happens to your car? It just gets smushed. That's how much energy, kinetic energy, is being wasted every time you stop your car. Enough to smash the car, completely destroy the car.
We got Regen braking now. I mean, I love that Regen braking.
Yeah. So when you have a heavy car, like we were talking about the e-Hummer, talk about a heavy car, the battery in that car costs
9,000 pounds, 4 tons.
Yeah, it weighs more than one of my cars, so just the battery. But so that kinetic energy to stop that. Now, fortunately, like you say, we have regenerative braking on electric vehicles, and so we can recover some of that. But regenerative braking is not 100% efficient. So but you are recovering, certainly more than 50% of your kinetic energy, but less than 100%. So it's much better than just using your friction brakes, but it's not getting all the energy. So I strayed terribly from your question. We were talking about the e-bike. So 20 watt hours per mile. You can go 50 miles with just one solar panel on your house. So like an electric moped that maybe has a max speed of 20 miles per hour, or excuse me, 30 miles per hour, probably is going to be in the range of 35 to 40 to 50 watt hours per mile. An electric motorcycle, like Karl likes to, well, everybody would like to have the new zero motorcycles. Those things are amazing. You're averaging somewhere between 100 to 125 watt hours per mile, which is
that's right.
three times better than your average electric car. And it's actually the same, or it's in the same ballpark, actually a little worse. Your electric,
it's a little worse than the Aptera.
A little worse
right?
than the Aptera.
Which is kind of stunning if you think about it, because you think, well, you have a smaller frontal area, but like you said, it's all about that coefficient of drag. When I'm sitting on that motorcycle and all of the bits and bobs hanging off of it aren't particularly aerodynamically efficient. So when you enclose all of that in a vehicle like the Aptera, where you have, it can have 2 passengers and cargo and so forth, they have that whole teardrop shape where not only is the front end of it important, but the tail end of it, you're not creating all of the turbulence. But yeah, that helps in the right sizing of transportation, but it's still not perfect, right?
Well, so let's put it in context. I talked about the way I perceive our situation is in every area of my lifestyle, not just my transportation. I need to get 10 to 100 times better. So we're almost to 10 times better with our electric vehicle transportation if we have an Aptera type vehicle. So first of all, a gas car, my minivan, gets 20 miles per gallon. My electric car, my Leaf, gets 114 miles per gallon. So that's, what is that? That's almost 5 times better. 114 miles per gallon versus 20 miles per gallon. Let's just call it, it's 5 times better. And then the Aptera is 3 times better than my Leaf. So it'd be getting the equivalent a little over 300 miles per gallon versus my 20 miles per gallon, say, minivan. So that's it's getting close to 10 times better. So that's really good. But what if we need to be 50 times better to be in sustainable balance with the universe? Our Earth's carrying capacity, the ability to take the waste products. So I think the answer is not simple. Certainly fuel consumption is a huge thing, but the way we produce the product, the pollutants that we make when we produce the product, and how we dispose of the product, and how well we're able to take the product instead of just taking it to a crusher and then actually running it through a shredder and then recovering some of the products to reuse in a less valuable way than they were when they were pure mineral. If we can produce the product with much less pollutants, have the product last for a longer period of time, it doesn't rust out or wear out, in 100, 200,000 miles, it might go 1,000,000 miles. But then we can take it apart at the end into virgin materials and actually reuse those materials without going and mining more, creating more effluents from the mining of new minerals, and reuse those in new products. Those are the types of things we need to be working on if we have any hope at all of sustaining 8 billion or more humans on this planet, because we all want, wonderful things like these modern cars. They're fantastic. They're very enjoyable to drive. They're very comfortable. They protect you from the weather. They protect you in crashes. I mean, who can imagine that you can have 2 cars collide like they do and people walk away? I mean, those are wonderful things, but we can't ecologically afford to keep doing them the way we have in the past. We need to do some things that are radically different in transportation and in housing and in healthcare, and the list goes on and on. But my focus is in mobility because I have a passion for it. I'm kind of curious, Larry, you got some semi trucks behind you. We talked beforehand a little bit about fuel efficiency on the big trucks, and I'm kind of interested in
Yeah,
what.
let's dive into that.
This is a little picture of Two Bit Da Vinci just did an episode actually last week about the Tesla Semi, and it's a lot more important than we think it is. And so what he's showing there is the first row is 11 Model 3 Teslas. They will save a little over 6,000 gallons. And then the same size battery that those 11 cars is going to be in one Semi. The one Semi is going to save over 14,000 gallons. So he says it's going to make a much bigger difference. We need to get these semis on the road. And so I drive, 14 hours a day. I'm sitting behind the wheel. So anyways, but every time I'm in that truck, like if I could just get Regen braking in there, right? That would be amazing. And so I just can't wait. I can't wait. But the problem there is I can't get in with the bigger companies that have the Tesla Semi, Pepsi, Frito-Lay. But that's my goal. And because I really, a couple things, I feel that the current average truck driver isn't going to have the tolerance to the learning curve for electric vehicles. I've had a Chevy Bolt now for
what's the learning curve? I don't see much of a learning curve.
Well, they're just right. The new technology, there's going to be bumps, and I can't think of the name right now. But anyways, as it gets developed, they're not going to be patient. But I think I just love the tech, so that's my goal right now, so that I can get behind that electric truck and help the innovation.
What kind of fuel economy are you seeing with electric versus a diesel powered truck? What is the differential?
I think it is like across the board, like you were saying, the Hummer to the gas
3 to
Hummer,
1.
5 times better.
That
just seems to be the average, right? Across the board on my Volt compared to the equal weight size car, it's 5 times better. When you pull that oil out of the ground and everything it takes, all electricity it takes to turn that into gasoline, when you break it all down, it's still 5 times cleaner.
Well, the other thing is that when you do take a break with the electric semi trucks, you can unhitch it and take the thing drag racing, right?
True.
0 to 60 and stupid fast.
I can't imagine going through all the gears and the difference it would be driving an electric truck to having to. I just can't get my head around how frustrated I'd be to have to go through 14 gears every time. So going through a town and stopping.
Oh, you are true. It's so true. So the truck I was in, the last one was a 97 Cummins motor with the 18 speed. And you're splitting and you're dividing. And yeah, you get it down to where you're skipping gears, you're lugging that motor every chance you can, which if you watch the stacks, every time you lug it, meaning you're not at the prime horsepower. And so you'll be shooting out a little black smoke out of the exhaust. They had that truck tuned in really good, though. The company I was with was really, paying attention to let's tune this thing for getting the best mileage.
So
but I found
how
myself
come?
Just like.
Go ahead. I just had this thought. I think we all know that locomotives, diesel locomotives, are really hybrids, right? So they have a diesel motor, but that's driving a generator that generates electricity, and the actual wheels are being driven by electricity. So why don't we do that with trucks if you're having to go through all those gears?
I wonder if it's kind of like, when they had all these diesel motors, this big industrial complex is the word that comes to my mind, turning. And so they have all these motors, all this infrastructure built to make the diesel engine, and to convert it over, it's just going to take time. But I wondered about that myself. Why aren't we like
even if it's more expensive up front? I think before we started recording, Kraig mentioned something like, these things are being driven, 1 million miles, right? So the amount of savings adds up really, really quickly because it's multiplied by the number of miles. So you'd think, and maybe they have, maybe I'm just ignorant and don't know about those things, but that there should be a more efficient. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. It seems like the push is the leapfrog right into all electric. I'm not sure. Now I drive the Chevy Bolt, so I love my Volt. And another guy just 2 weeks ago, I couldn't find the clip, but he basically put up a similar chart. and he says we can build 10 Chevy Bolts for every Model 3. And if you add that up, because one Model 3 only helps one person, but 10 people, families were helping. My Chevy Volt, I plug in when I get home. I actually bought a second Chevy Bolt because I was working in Kalamazoo and I was working in Elkhart. So I would go up there, do my 4 hours. I'd come home, jump in my other Bolt, and drive to Elkhart. You know what I mean? It was cheaper to do that so that I could stay on electric. And I'm picking up the cars between $4,000 and $6,000 with a little bit of damage and fixing them. And I mean, I just love that car, and I kind of in that school. And so you're bringing up a good point. Why isn't the semi truck going to that? Why don't we have this hybrid type? But maybe it's the infrastructure. Anyways, it seems like we're just leapfrogging right.
Yeah, I mean, it is a transition. It is a transition technology, hybrids, in my opinion, right? Because at some point when range gets large enough, even for semis, and when charging gets fast enough, that it's all over, because the price differential is there, and the cost. Anyway, a lot of things have, but in the meantime, we have the hybrids and we have the plug-in hybrids, and it makes sense because they're so much more efficient. But yeah, I think even Chevy has discontinued the Chevy Volt with a V Victor, and decided that they're going to go to full electric, right? So
just a quick, I caught an article here. It says the Tesla semi-truck gets 20 miles per gallon equivalent. So, which compared to, you were saying, Larry, you one of the 1997 diesel truck you were driving was getting 5 to 6 miles per gallon.
Correct.
Yeah, and so then the Tesla semi is getting 20 miles per gallon, which is,
so we're back to that 3 to 4, ratio.
4 times better. And then so when you're in the mountains, we just were out in California and pulling a trailer with our minivan, and these mountains were horrendous, going up and going down, and just
right.
Going up, I'm worried about, my minivan shouldn't be pulling this heavy trailer anyway. And then I'm going through the mountains, going up these, really trying to take it easy on the transmission. And then going down, I'm like, okay, well, it's like, well, I don't want to, I've got to pick a lower gear, or, I got to be careful about not overheating my brakes. But if I had regenerative braking,
right.
I'm wondering, when you're going down a mountain or a slope, are you using your Jake brake, your engine braking, or a combination of that plus just engine braking, being in the right gear plus brakes? Or
right.
What are you doing?
No, I'm dropping into the right gear. I'm disrupting traffic because I don't want to shift anymore. I have to. So I was doing a run down to Nashville twice a week, sometimes three times a week. So we get in a little bit of the mountain range coming out of Kentucky into Tennessee. And so some pretty good hills there, but nothing like I grew up in Colorado. But anyways, I would grab that gear, Jake full on. It's loud, right? And keeping it right at the speed limit. And I'm just flipping the Jake on, off. I'd let it run up to 70, and then the Jake on, back down to 60, then Jake on. And that worked. The Jake brake is powerful. But like you said, if we had regen braking like they're advertising with the Tesla, I would love it. It'd be such a savings, and I can't wait. And I like the semi. I like the truck. I like driving.
Yeah, I'm just curious of when you're engine braking. The Jake braking is basically closing the valves, or it's actually restricting the exhaust. So you're using the pistons to actually compress air, and that's what's actually slowing the truck down.
Yep.
But then the fuel system, I imagine the modern trucks have electronic injectors. And
even the 97 had that. It had the leg, so it just shuts the fuel off.
Okay, so you're not using fuel, where it's in the old ones were mechanical injectors, so they would have been putting fuel in there even when you're trying to slow down.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So
no. Yeah, this thing, the injector and the Jake brake, when you pull the valve cover off, the Jake brake is looks just as complicated as the injector. It's quite a big setup. Wires running in there, even on that 97.
Interesting. Carl, you wanted us to shift.
Yeah, we probably need to start to come to a close, and maybe give the listeners some practical advice. But I do want to cover maybe one more topic. So with trucks, we're talking about the long haul rigs, right? So the one thing that maybe we haven't discussed is that intermediate last mile solution, the local delivery truck. And I know we're seeing the Amazon delivery trucks that are being manufactured by Rivian. I don't know if you've all seen those. I actually spotted one in the wild when I was in Kansas City recently. They're pretty neat looking. There's a guy that did a review. Was it you, Larry, that turned me onto that? There was a guy that did a review on this, and his video, his YouTube channel blew up just because he was one of the delivery people.
Exactly. Yeah, he did
went through
one
it.
review.
Yeah. So it was that was kind of a fun thing to see. One thing I noticed when I lived in Germany is that our mail was delivered with people riding e-trikes, right? So they were essentially electric bicycle, but tricycles, two in the front with this big box in the front, but they were electric, right? And because they were basically going from one neighborhood to the next. So I think there's a lot of potential with those kind of things too. And I know Arcimoto, if you're not familiar with this, it's a three-wheeler electric, reverse trike, two in front, one in the back. They have a version called the Deliverator, which, the idea is when you're delivering pizza or you're delivering, Uber Eats or whatever it is, it's got a little compartment in it that can keep food hot or cold or whatever, or flowers. And then you do your run for a couple miles in a certain area, and then you go back and you plug it back in. I think there's a lot of potential there for energy savings.
There is, and the lightness of the vehicle is going to be what helps a vehicle like a Arcimoto, because it's a much lighter vehicle. And from a delivery perspective, if they can make the vehicle easy to get in and out of, will be helpful. It is almost as wide as a car, and so you do still have parking issues. It's a little bit better, but yeah, certainly the electric is, and lightweight electrics, something that can protect the person who's doing the deliveries from the weather, is important.
So kind of tying this all up, in today's market, or maybe looking forward a couple of years, what's something that the listeners can take away from this? If you can only have one vehicle and you're going to be pulling a boat or a fifth wheel and you got to go up to the UP, nothing is going to replace a big dually diesel truck right now. It's just not, it's not on the market. But if you have the luxury of maybe a second vehicle that you're just using for commuting, and you still have that one vehicle that covers all of your other needs, but you can, have a commuter vehicle. I mean, for me, my first one was the Nissan LEAF, and then we had a minivan that we used for our road trips. But any suggestions along those lines? Like, what is somebody who's listening to this should they be taking away? Like, what should they be looking for maybe in their next vehicle?
Well, from my perspective, I went a hybrid, actually, by the vehicle, not hybrid combined. So I love the Chevy Bolt. It was a well-engineered car, and it's had some good service life with it. But still, at the end of its service life, you start having you have multiple systems that are more systems than, say,
it's
just
complex.
Yeah, it's more complex. So there's more things to go wrong. And so I'm of the mindset of, since we, if you're a multiple vehicle family, you keep one of your vehicles that does the utility work. This is what I've done. It's like we have a minivan, a gasoline powered minivan that can pull a trailer. It's got the fold down seats, so it's got all the cargo space we need. It's our pickup truck, and it's what we go on long vacations with. It's what we do heavy work with. But we have several electric vehicles, several electric cars, and electric motorcycles, and electric mopeds, and bicycles. And we're the preference is to take the things that are more fuel efficient, because they cost less, significantly less when the gas price is up, to take those, and they're more enjoyable in general to drive. The electric vehicles are a lot funner to drive, and bicycles and motorcycles are way more fun, but the weather doesn't always permit. And so we just have because we're fortunate and can have multiple vehicles, we've chosen to have, say, an electric car and a gasoline minivan, because for our use case, it's, for other people, it might be a gasoline pickup truck plus an electric car. I question, if you're using your pickup truck if it's a multi-car family and you're using the pickup truck to do commuting, that's always, from an efficiency standpoint, it's I understand. I mean, if it's your one vehicle, or if you have two vehicles and one of them's a pickup truck, you've got people and they've got it to get there somehow. And so, but it's just, you look at the cost, even the cost of a pickup truck these days, and I can't believe, they're over $50,000. And then if the thing is rusting out, that's my pet peeve with the auto industry. If I'm going to spend literally years of my life working to pay for the vehicle, I don't want it to wear out. So I guess I'd be looking to try to, I'd be looking at a used electric car. I'd definitely be test driving all the new electric cars because they're fun. And I would be prepared that as they come off lease to be able to step into a quality used electric vehicle. And I think the return on their investment is pretty good if you're looking at it from a cost per mile perspective. So I'm a just kind of a regular guy. I don't buy new cars. I like to buy things that are had the patina worn off from a little bit.
Right, and the big depreciation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You drive it off the lot and it's already worth $10,000 less. And
Yeah,
on top of that, the Inflation Reduction Act now has a provision that there's a tax credit for used EVs. So that's something to look at. And now that EVs are actually starting to be out there on the secondary market.
Yeah, and the Teslas have shown that they have the batteries are not wearing out. There's certain brands that have been out there long enough to know that the batteries are not going to wear out on you. So, for instance, you could buy a car coming off lease, 3 years old, drive it for 5 years, sell it again for almost what you paid for it, have saved all that fuel cost, and avoid.
And you're still within the battery warranty at that point, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So that I think that there's a real, that's probably the sweet spot for people who have multiple cars and are normally into newer vehicles. I would recommend looking at it that way, getting a car that's coming off a 3-year lease, because it's just, to me, it's the best value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes, and that's how I used to buy my combustion cars. I would always buy something that's 2, 3, 4 years old, and still had a lot of life. And then at some point when it was nickel and diming me to death, I'd let some student play with it, right? And upgrade from there. Yeah, and I can attest, this is anecdotal, of course, but my 2015 Tesla Model S has over 120,000 miles, and the battery's still in good shape. I just got done with an almost 4,000 or 5,000 mile trip to Phoenix, Arizona, and really had no issues in terms of charging. Now it's a little bit older. It doesn't charge as fast as the ones that are rolling off the assembly line today, but it was still totally doable. And certainly for a regional or commuter vehicle, something like that would be a very good buy. Maybe one caveat as a former Leaf owner, and maybe you can disagree with me here, Kraig, because yours is pretty high mileage. I found that the Leafs with their air-cooled batteries tended to degrade a little bit faster than some of the other vehicles. Maybe that's not as much of an issue here in Michigan, that it's a cooler climate. But my first one lived in Kansas City, and it was at below 80% of its capacity within a couple of years, and 40,000 miles. And even Nissan's not doing that anymore. So
yeah, so I'm curious on what your state of health is with your Tesla with 120,000 miles on it. Do you know?
I don't have an official number. I can tell you what the range estimate is when I charge it to 100%. But I don't know if that's a good indicator. Originally it was 252 miles range at 100%, and now I'm down to like 230. So my guesstimate is I'm in the 85 to 90% of its original capacity, but I haven't done a test where I charge it 100%, run it down to 0, and then charge it again to see how many kilowatt hours I'm getting in there. It's probably something I should do at some point, but I don't know.
Yeah. So our Nissan Leaf has 96,000 miles on it, and we're at around 80 95% state of health. And I'm actually planning to keep that. And actually, I chart the degradation. I'm kind of the use case, and I want to actually document that and share that. And my goal is to actually replace that battery at some point with a remanufactured battery or a battery from a crashed Nissan LEAF, just to demonstrate that we don't have to discard our vehicles. We shouldn't just throw them away. You know, it's like the battery is very modular. It just unbolts and unplugs, and you can put a new one in there. And so I think that more and more we need to think about how can we just not, you know, crush things and shred them up? How can we actually make them last longer? And I'm willing to be a guinea pig for that, at least for the electric vehicles. So I actually would caution people about the Nissan LEAF battery, because there's a battery shortage right now. We're having a hard time making enough batteries, new batteries for all the electric cars. And that's going to keep the price of replacement batteries and also new batteries a little bit higher than we had originally anticipated. So I think that you should be considering battery life when you purchase a vehicle and be concerned about it. But I would go with some a model that's proven to have a good life. And Tesla is an example of that. And I would think that, I don't know if you watch the prices of Tesla's, Karl. How have it been doing? I mean, have they been
used or new? You mean used?
Well, in general, the affordability of the Model 3s, I see a lot of normal people. I would consider normal people like Tony.
I mean, they're still pretty premium. The one thing I just noticed in the news here is that Tesla seems to have dropped the price of their Model Y to just under 55,000, which is one of the thresholds for the Inflation Reduction Act tax credit. Right now, if you buy a brand new Tesla Model Y with pretty much the basics, the basic paint, and you don't get any of the full self-driving and yada yada. Anyway, it's right around just under 54,000, and then minus 7,500 if you qualify for that tax credit. You're now in the high 40s, which is certainly not a cheap car by any stretch of the imagination, but for what that vehicle is, it's pretty compelling. And I got to tell you, maybe afterwards we need to talk. Or how interested are you in my Model S? Because I'm maybe thinking about upgrading, because that's a hard one to turn down. There's a lot of dynamics here. You mentioned the price of batteries, but I think for Tesla now, their production capacity is so good that they're finally catching up with the demand. And if you saw at the end of last year, where we had this unfortunate situation that the Inflation Reduction Act was creating a kind of an Osborne effect, where people said, I don't know if you're not old enough to remember, Osborne was a computer company that advertised that, well, next year we're going to bring out this new model with all these features at the same price, and their short-term sales plummeted because nobody was going to buy the model of today because they knew the better one was coming. So it was a little bit of that effect with the IRA, that people knew that the tax credit was coming, but it wasn't applicable right now. So they said, well, I'm just going to wait till the new year. So what Tesla then did is they responded and said, well, we're going to drop the price of our vehicles so that people keep buying them. So that's kind of the dynamic that I've seen recently, is that they're able to, with all the gigafactories that they have now, they're able to make so many cars that they're keeping up with demand. And now that's having a, supply demand kind of effect. But in terms of affordable vehicles, we're also seeing the Chevy Bolt EV, which that model is also getting a little bit long tooth. And, as the Ultium batteries production starts to ramp up, that vehicle is probably also going to fade away. So right now, those are a really, really good value. I mean, I think we're in the mid 20s, $25,000, $27,000, and that's before the tax credit. And the one asterisk you have to put on there is that the Chevy Bolt does not have very fast DC fast charging. I'm not going to get into that. There are plenty of YouTube videos. If you're using it for a regional vehicle, local vehicle, great car. I drive one as a company car, a 2019 for Consumers Energy, but it's great. It gets me around. But if I had to drive that car to Florida or Phoenix, it would drive me nuts, because for every hour that you're driving, you're probably charging for 45 minutes, right? So whereas some of the newer vehicles, they charge so quickly. So your driving to charging ratio is going to be much better. But anyway, to your point, the affordability of some of these vehicles that are, maybe not the latest technology, but 5 years ago would have been peak technology, are already coming down to the point where the average person can afford those much more easily, and they're going to get a lot of service life out of them. And speaking of service life, something you touched on, and maybe we need to explore this another time, is this whole idea of right to repair, right? So it's not just the batteries, but other components, right? So the electronics, the chips, the boards. If there's some certain proprietary piece of the vehicle that doesn't function anymore, it's dead in the water, right? So I have the guy who bought my original Nissan LEAF, and I bought it used, has an issue where the onboard AC charger failed and he can't get one, right? I mean, Nissan is, they either tell him you can't get one, or it's going to be so crazy expensive, there's no point. So, I mean, and then if you can't charge the car, and it's unusual, right? EVs typically don't fail this way, but there are these border cases where there are certain parts that you're not going to be able to get. So if we can design them in such a way that these parts are much more replaceable, much more commodities, so that they can be replaced, then we can get a lot more service life. I mean, like you said, if you pop a new battery into a Nissan LEAF, particularly if one that's, the original was 24 kilowatt hour, if you can pop a 40 kilowatt hour battery in there from a later model LEAF, holy cow, you've basically got a new car, right?
Yeah, it's a good deal. So yeah, I agree with what you say with the Chevy Bolt, Bolt with a B, and it's a good car and it's a good value proposition. There is literally, how many cars are being introduced in 2023? I mean, the range of electric vehicles is, how many models are available? It's
yeah, I don't even know, but there's certainly way more choice. When I got into it, it was basically the Chevy Volt and the Nissan LEAF, because at that time I couldn't afford a brand new Tesla, and that has certainly changed. Especially in the afford. I mean, you always see these new halo cars, like the Lucid Air or the Hummer, but now you're seeing vehicles that I would say are, quote unquote, affordable is always a sliding range and open to discussion, right? But you're seeing the Hyundais, the Kias. My Kia Niro is, was $40,000, something like that. It's not cheap by any stretch, but for what it is and how cheap it is to run, it's an amazing value, I think, right? And I think we're starting to see more and more vehicles like that.
I suspect that we'll see really good service life out of the Hyundai and the Kia. And to me, it would seem like they're a bridge. If you want to get into electric vehicles right now, you have some good models you can choose from in the used market, and then perhaps be looking that 5 or 7 years from now, I think that the market's going to be very strong with some very, very affordable products from China and Vietnam, for example, that are going to be hard to say no to as far as the value proposition and their price point. And, we have to be competitive in everything that we make, as far as making sure that with the initial price, and then also the reliability, the long-term reliability of the product. And then also, my little pet thing is thinking about how we can actually take those things apart at the end of the life and not end up with a lot of waste products as a result.
I wonder if the Cybertruck is going to be with the stainless steel body, if it's going to be the new revolution, because I could be comfortable with, and I'm really affected by looks. I'm not a fan of that look. But when you talk about the engineering, practicality, no rust, right? I started out as a body man, and the rust is just a nightmare to repair. And perfectly good vehicles, and once the rust's in the frame, it's such a shame. So it'll be interesting, right?
The Chevy trucks have that strong engine in them, and they go so many miles, but the body's falling off from them, and it's embarrassing that that our American car companies have been so short-sighted, and that they would sell a product that would deteriorate that badly in known locations. I mean, you look at every Chevy truck and the rust is in the same exact spot. So, our competition coming out of, there's a reason why we buy other brands, is that because they're offering a superior product.
Let me add a little value added section here. So this is the idea here is we talk about product service ideas that have added value in our EV lives. Recently, I learned that there is an EV charger, level 2 EV charger going in Ludington at the Ludington Bay Brewing Company. And I think that's a great location because it's right downtown. If you're getting on the Badger to go across, that would be a great place to charge up an EV. It's and obviously the company themselves, Ludington Bay, is a fun place to go to. Obviously don't drink and drive, but there are also hotels in that area, that sort of thing. So I think that's pretty cool. How about you guys? Anything pop into your heads?
I'll pop in on that. For me, dang it, I can't remember the YouTube guy, but anyways, he put up a new tweet basically calling out the charger problem, because I think that's our next big hiccup. So it's funny, Karl talks.
Kyle, is that Kyle from Out of Spec Motoring? Or
yeah, Kyle at Out of Spec. So he was down at one of the chargers over the holidays, and I think let's just say there were 10 charge point chargers, and they decided this is the day they're going to reprogram, and they got the numbers mixed up. So 1 was 2 and 3 was 4.
So you activate one and another one unlocks. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they couldn't get them unlocked. So he went, he got on his tweet, and they made enough noise that technicians showed up within the hours while he was there to fix it. So I think we got a voice, maybe, so to speak. And then Karl did a really cool YouTube just a week ago where he shows him going up with the Tesla, and he goes, "Oh, I don't need to use this because the car talks to the charger and I'm out of it." And I wonder
plug and charge,
why don't I think the technology is enough there? And then there's this new orange charger. Anyways, if we can get the chargers to the Tesla like simplicity and durability, that we don't have all these fault problems, that the car talks to the charger and the people stay out of it, right? As long as we don't have humans involved, that will take a and so anyways, I'm excited about
remove some of the complexity.
Right. I'd really like to lean into that. And if we could put pressure on the government, let's standardize this, let's simplify it, let's quit clowning around. And I think ChargePoint has just made a mess of things. We had 40 of them at Western, I think, if I'm right, and then they were all gone. They had to take them all out. And the movie theater here in Kalamazoo had the nice ChargePoint, and then ChargePoint talked them to upgrade to the new ones so that the handles are on the recording, retracting things. And the maintenance guy told me that the movie theater is really frustrated because they came in and said it's only gonna be $7,000. By the time it was done, it was $10,000, and then they were on contract to pay $60 a month for it to do whatever. And the minute that contract up, they threw a trash bag. So it's a perfectly good charger I went to for 5 years. Now it has a trash bag over it, and because of ChargePoint's greed and whatever, they're, you know what I mean? They just ruined it, I think. So it's unfortunate.
Reliability is a huge issue there, and that goes back to what Kraig was saying about replaceability, serviceability, that we can fix things. I know in Kansas City, a lot of the DC fast chargers were built with 3G modems in them. I mean, gee, who would have thought that at some point we'd be upgrading the cell phone networks, right? And all of a sudden, as soon as 3G went offline, boom, all of the DC fast chargers in the Kansas City area were dead. Unless you were, wow. How frustrating is that?
Kraig, with your
so I'll carry on with that whole charging theme. I do agree that it would be beneficial if someone would mandate a charging standard, whether that's the Tesla or the CCS, all these competing standards. It would be nice if the CHAdeMO had from day one had bi-directional charging as part of its standard.
Oh yeah.
So, if
CCS, V2G, that's a whole other topic, but go ahead.
Yeah, but so that someone needs to step in and say, listen, the standard is this, and it has bi-directional charging. It's a requirement. And so this would, to me, the electric car, the batteries in the electric car, the storage capacity is the most important thing impact globally. is that storage capacity, because it allows us to do things with the intermittent renewable energy that we couldn't do without the energy storage that's available in all these cars that we're going to have. But
Exactly.
I'll go along with so there's a guy named Desmond Wheatley, and he's been associated for over 10 years with a company that's making a plug and play. It can come in on a semi truck. It's a charging station. It has a platform and batteries and solar panels, and they can bring it in on a semi truck and drop it in place. It doesn't require infrastructure. You don't have to dig trenches to make it work. And so you can actually just bring them in temporarily, or you can bring them into, like a city, like New York City or whatever, or a parking lot that doesn't have the, no one has the infrastructure to charge 100 cars in their parking lot. But this is a modular deal. It's made, the company's, Desmond's company is called Beam Global. So you could probably throw a link or a picture to that. It's a neat product. It's a neat concept. Karl, you're probably aware of the cost and the amount of time it takes to get a new charging station installed. And if you could just call up someone and say,
Absolutely.
hey, could I have a charging station there tomorrow and working, what would that do? I mean, it would seem like it would be,
yeah,
you manufacture them in the factory too.
Right. Yeah, the behind the meter stuff, like the make ready that we have to go through Consumers Energy for putting in public chargers, that's a significant part of it. It's not only the cost and the coordination, but you have to have multiple parties working together, that sort of thing. But yeah, if you could plop this thing down and it starts charging today, that would be pretty awesome. So I'm going to steal an idea here from Nate Hagens at The Great Simplification. I'm going to ask you a couple personal questions, and you probably already know what they are since you're a disciple of that show. What's the thing that gives you the most concern right now?
Well, we live in a complex, interrelated world, and I think that I'm not going to predict which system will take us down, but because we're so interconnected, any subsystem can take the whole network of systems down, and that would be the thing that worries me the most. And it won't be something that's that we can actually anticipate. It's this random interaction of how the systems are all interrelate with each other. Some really obscure thing can trigger a cascading effect. So I'm a very optimistic person when I wake up in the morning, and I go to bed often in a very pessimistic mood. So in the morning, I think that we can get all these things fixed in the next couple of years. And when I go to bed, I wonder if we haven't already lost the battle. So you caught me in the middle of the day. So I'm saying
you're in the middle. So yeah. On the flip side of that, when you wake up in the morning, what's the thing that you're most hopeful about?
I've been thinking a lot about the, I'm a technologist, but and I identified this or recognized this many years ago, is that we have enough technology to solve all our problems. Our problems are not technical in nature; they're social and human in nature, and so the thing I'm most hopeful about is our ability as humans to create solutions that don't exist. We can imagine things so it's the creative power of the human mind that we can imagine things that do not exist today, and that we can actually make them happen. And so that's what makes me most hopeful. We have a whole array of many, many issues that we need to work on. And if we work on them individually, or even if we come up with a solution by ourselves, it won't be accepted, because part of the thing about being humans is if we don't invent it, we don't own it. So what I'm most hopeful about is that we can come together and to collaborate and communicate and get along with each other better, so that we can come up with these shared solutions that we can implement and have a better world.
Excellent. And I fully agree with you, in a sense of community, to make those things happen. And then finally, and this one too, is so if you were a benevolent dictator and there was one thing you could do with your magic wand, with no personal recourse, to help make the world a better place, whether it's in the transportation sector or anything else, what would it be?
Well, I would definitely make it so, and I've heard someone else say this, I'd make it so that could never happen. I don't trust any one person. I would want to be involved in setting up a system of checks and balances so that no one person could ever be in that position, because unfortunately, we're all flawed people. And so if I had ultimate power, my flaws are also so greatly magnified that, that I can be doing a lot of damage with those flaws that are in me personally. But from a practical standpoint, I'd almost go back in history and make it so that the bicycle won the transportation wars, and we wouldn't have the impact in our environment, or our culture, I should say, of the fragmentation of the American culture as a result of the automobile being causing us to become more fragmented, and the separation of our families as we grow up and we move out and we go. It's just how spread out we are and how urbanized, or I don't know, I see that if we could take a step back, we would almost, there was a fork in the road where Henry Ford actually recognized it. He spent over half his life building the museum down there, a village, the Henry Ford Village.
Greenfield Village.
Yeah, to it's a time capsule to see what life was like before the industrialization of America, which in large part was driven by the automotive. It had a strong influence. I'm not saying that we wouldn't have had factories and industrialization, but
but now people could live 10, 20 miles away from their work because they can commute, right? As opposed to we live much closer together.
It's part of the separation issue of fragmenting, and it that is part of my hope is that we can come back together. Is that we need to be much more community. We're social animals, and I think that we've strayed. We can get back to our origins a lot would be helpful, and relying on each other more, whether it's having public transport or commuting or whatever. These individual vehicles is just part of this independent mindset that we have about what freedom is. And what was it? It's like, is our lifestyle, do we own our lifestyle, or does our lifestyle own us? And what percentage of our life, years of our life, do we work to buy, say, a car and feed that car? Well, first of all, to manufacture the car, to buy it, to maintain it, and to feed it. What percentage of our life, how many years of our life do we spend for that particular artifact? And is it worth it? The freedom that we get, so those are the things that we can imagine in our minds. Like, well, what would be a different way of doing that?
Yep. No, great point. We buy stuff we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like, right? I think I've heard that quote. It's not mine. No, great insights, and I appreciate that. Any final words before we close today, Kraig?
Well, thank you again for having me on the podcast, and hopefully you'll be able to edit this out to something that people want to listen to. So.
Oh, I'm sure. Right now I'm thinking that we got to keep all this intact. We had some great interaction, and you do way more than this, so I'm sure we're going to have you on again. So
V2G, that's our next
V2G.
one.
Vehicle to grid, vehicle to building, vehicle to load.
Very exciting. Very excited about that. Yeah.
Cool.
Very
good. Well, and Larry, any final words from your side?
That would be it. Let's do the next one on V2G, because I think, just like Kraig was pointing out, there's all this energy just sitting in people's parking lots, garages. And I just reached out to the local engineer, and luckily I'm not part of Karl's, is it MISO?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not, is that right, Karl?
I believe it's MISO, yeah. And I'm not an expert.
Anyways, so for consumers, they're basically putting V2G on the back burner. I'm down here on the bottom, AEP and whatever we're part of, he says they are being more aggressive about it. So he sees some hope. But it seems like it's all caught up in politics, right? The agreements. But I really liked what Kraig shared, so I'm excited. Let's sit down, put a podcast together, and you know, maybe I'm willing to get out and shake some trees and see if we can't get something going.
That sounds good.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen, and we'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to be notified of future episodes. If you are listening on an audio-only platform, please also see our YouTube channel for additional content at 0E-Michigan.